The human whisper stopped time. The alien woman stood frozen in silence. Ships of every shape and color hovered outside, some small and sleek, others enormous and covered in strange spires that seemed almost alive. Inside, the station hummed with the quiet energy of thousands of beings from countless worlds. Alien languages, clicks, hums, and whistles echoed through the halls, forming a chaotic symphony that somehow seemed natural. Humans, in comparison, were rare and small, often overlooked by the taller, grander species around them. But humans had a habit of being noticed, sometimes in ways no one expected. The human delegation had arrived 2 days before, led by a man named Elias. He was not tall, not strong, and not particularly commanding in presence, but his eyes held something that made other beings pause. He spoke with calm assurance, every word chosen carefully, but it was not the way he spoke that made a difference. It was something deeper, something invisible, something that even the most advanced species could not measure. Among the alien observers was a woman named Kalira. She belonged to a species that had dominated 1,000 star systems through intelligence, discipline, and control. Her kind prided itself on emotionless reasoning. To feel was dangerous, to show it was forbidden. Kalira had studied humans for weeks, prepared for their strangeness, but she had never expected to feel anything herself. Her duty was simple: observe, report, and remain detached. That morning, Kalira stood on a balcony overlooking the central chamber of the station. Humans moved among alien delegates like tiny bright dots, their gestures simple, their voices soft but clear. She watched Elias as he smiled at a small group of diplomats. There was no fear, no attempt to dominate, just warmth. Kalira had never seen warmth displayed so openly before. Her chest, or the space where her species, equivalent of a chest beat with silent rhythm, tightened. She told herself it was just an illusion, a trick of her mind. The chamber was calm. Discussions had paused. A treaty about resource sharing was being drafted, and the main delegates had stepped back to consult their aides. In this rare moment of silence, Elias turned slightly and noticed Kalira watching. He inclined his head, a gesture of simple acknowledgement. Kalira's pulse, measured and disciplined, seemed to falter, though she did not allow it to show. She stared, unsure why the human's small gesture affected her so deeply. Then he whispered. It was a simple phrase one human might have said to anyone: "You're remarkable." The sound was barely audible, a breeze among the chaos of alien murmurs, but for Kalira it was like a hammer striking stone. Her mind froze. Her eyes widened, her limbs locked in place, and the air around her seemed to slow. Time continued outside her own perception. Conversations moved forward, beings gestured and shifted, but she could not move. She could not speak. The whisper had passed through the room and lodged itself inside her, impossible and undefinable. She tried to think, tried to recall the teachings of her species, the rules that had governed her life for decades. Words of admiration, words of emotion, words meant to convey beauty or worth, these had been banned since she was born. Her elders had called them dangerous, a risk to logic and civilization. She had believed them, followed the rules perfectly, trained herself to resist sentiment and impulse. But now she could feel something stirring, something she did not understand. Her thoughts raced. She wanted to step back, to move, to regain control, but her body betrayed her. Her species had mastered many things: war, diplomacy, strategy, but they had not mastered this. Humans, she realized, had a strength that was not physical, not technological, not tactical. Their strength lay in feeling, in understanding, in reaching out without calculation or fear. Elias stepped back, unaware of the effect his whisper had caused. He continued to observe, gentle and calm, with no idea that his words had broken through centuries of discipline. Other aliens glanced toward Kalira, some curious, some concerned. She could feel their attention, but she could not respond. The whispers of suspicion reached her ears, but they sounded distant, muted. All she could focus on was the human's voice, the softness of the words, the honesty of the expression. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours to Kalira. The station continued its rhythm, and the human delegates moved as they always had, unaware of the effect they had caused. She saw them helping a smaller alien delegate retrieve a fallen device, laughing lightly at a minor mishap. The ease with which they interacted, the simplicity of their gestures, was astonishing. No one else in the room seemed capable of such fluidity of emotion without hesitation. Finally, Kalira felt the edges of time begin to creep back. She blinked, forced her limbs to move, and drew in a breath she did not know she had been holding. Her mind raced to explain what had just happened. Was it a psychic attack, a form of advanced human manipulation? She studied Elias, searching for any signs of deceit, any glimmer of intention, but found nothing. He was as ordinary as a human could be, yet somehow extraordinary. Her species had faced threats far worse than humans, entire fleets destroyed, planets conquered, civilizations crushed. Yet none of those dangers had caused her to falter like this. A simple whisper, a single expression of admiration, had undone her perfectly ordered mind. She felt a strange mix of awe and fear. Was this what humans had always been capable of? Could their emotional power rival any weapon her people had ever created? Kalira left the balcony and moved toward the central chamber. She had to know more. She had to understand. The rules that had guided her life no longer seemed sufficient. For the first time, she felt uncertainty, the kind that her species regarded as weakness. Yet she did not recoil. She did not resist. She was compelled forward, drawn by something she could not name. Elias noticed her approaching and offered a polite nod. Kalira found herself responding automatically, the formalities of diplomacy slipping away. "I wish to speak," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Of course," Elias replied, smiling gently. He did not seem surprised, threatened, or suspicious. He simply waited, patient and calm, as if he understood something she had not yet grasped. They walked together to a quieter area of the station, away from the main chamber, where the voices of other species became a soft murmur. Kalira struggled to form coherent thought. How could she explain what had happened? How could she convey the magnitude of a simple human phrase without sounding irrational or worse, insane? Elias watched her carefully. His understanding was quiet, deep, and patient. He did not push, did not probe. He simply offered presence, and that alone was enough to give her space to recover. Finally, Kalira spoke. "Your words, they are unusual. They affect me in ways I do not understand." Elias nodded. "I did not mean to cause harm. I only spoke what I thought." "But you do not know," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "My people, we do not speak like that. Words of admiration, of emotion, they are dangerous, forbidden." "And yet your words, they," she trailed off, unsure how to complete the thought without exposing too much of herself. Elias tilted his head. "They made you feel something." "Yes," she admitted. "Something I have not felt in years, perhaps ever." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but profound. The station continued its activity around them, but in that moment, nothing else seemed to exist. Kalira realized that this human, small and unarmed, had accomplished something no weapon, no fleet, no centuries of her species' discipline could achieve. He had reached her, touched a part of her that had been sealed away. As the hours passed, Kalira and Elias spoke quietly, exchanging words carefully. She described the teachings of her people, their history, their fear of emotion. He listened without judgment, without trying to explain or argue. He offered insight into human history, how emotions had helped humans survive, grow, and connect. His calm honesty was like a balm, soothing her fears while expanding her understanding. Kalira realized something extraordinary. The human's power was not in technology or strength or numbers. It was in their willingness to feel, to connect, to speak truth plainly. And if her species could be touched by such simple words, what else might they achieve? By the time the sun, or what passed for a sun in that sector of the galaxy, began to set over the station, Kalira felt something she had not experienced in her life: curiosity untempered by fear. She wanted to know more about humans, about their ways, about the potential that had shaken her so profoundly. She did not yet understand the consequences of this awakening, but she knew one thing clearly: the world, or rather the galaxy, would never be the same again. As night fell outside the station, Kalira returned to her quarters. She reflected on the events of the day, on the human who had caused her to pause in silence, on the whisper that had stopped her time. Her mind raced with possibilities, with questions, with wonder. For the first time in her life, she was aware of a force she could not control, a force she could only explore. And somewhere deep inside, she realized she wanted to explore it. Kalira could not sleep. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling of her quarters, but her mind refused to rest. The words that had stopped her time haunted her every thought. "You're remarkable." Simple words, gentle, kind, harmless to anyone else, yet they had torn through the layers of her discipline and shaken the very foundation of her life. She had never known a feeling so powerful, so confusing, and so dangerous. Her species had spent centuries building walls around their hearts. They believed emotions were a weakness. That sentiment led to chaos, war, and failure. From the moment Kalira could think, she had been taught to control every reaction, to deny every impulse, to suppress curiosity about others' feelings. And now, with a single whisper from a human, all those lessons felt fragile, almost meaningless. She rose and moved to the balcony of her quarters. The stars stretched endlessly before her, glittering against the black void. Ships of countless designs floated silently in the distance, lights blinking in patterns that suggested communication she could not yet understand. The vastness of space had always reminded her of her insignificance, but tonight it only deepened the turmoil inside. She felt small, yes, but also awake in a way she had never been. Kalira's thoughts kept returning to Elias. He had done nothing extraordinary by his species' standards. He had not commanded, threatened, or displayed power. Yet his words had reached her where no strategy, no fleet, no centuries of discipline could. She realized that human strength was something entirely different, something her people had almost forgotten to respect or even notice. She recalled the quiet conversations they had had after the incident. Elias had listened patiently while she spoke, offering understanding without judgment. He had not laughed at her hesitation, nor had he tried to explain himself in a way that demanded immediate comprehension. His calm honesty, his openness to the unknown, was like a mirror showing her what life could feel like if she allowed herself to experience it. Kalira felt a spark of something she could not name: curiosity, fascination, a longing. Her species had words for everything, except for what she felt now. She had studied humans extensively, analyzed their behaviors, even practiced interpreting their emotions from afar, but nothing had prepared her for this. She realized that no observation, no report, no training could have prepared her for the raw immediacy of feeling stirred by another being's kindness. The next day, Kalira moved through the station with careful steps. Diplomats, aides, and observers passed her by, but her attention was elsewhere. She found herself watching humans interact with other species, noticing the small gestures that made them stand out. A hand extended to help, a smile offered without expectation, a word of encouragement whispered in passing. Everywhere she looked, humans seemed to radiate something her own species had deliberately extinguished. Her observations were interrupted when an elder from her species approached. The elder, a tall figure draped in flowing ceremonial robes, regarded her with sharp eyes. "Kalira," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "you seem unsettled." Kalira straightened, forcing her posture into the rigid form expected of her. "I am functioning, Elder," she replied, careful to keep her voice steady. The Elder raised a brow. "Functioning does not mean understanding. You were observed in the chamber yesterday. Your hesitation was unusual. Explain it." Kalira felt a flash of panic. To reveal what had caused her hesitation was risky. It could be seen as weakness or worse, as a breach of discipline. Yet she could not lie. The memory of Elias' words pressed against her mind, demanding acknowledgement. "It was a human," she admitted finally. "He spoke a phrase that affected me." The Elder's eyes narrowed. "Affected you? How?" Kalira hesitated, searching for words that would not betray too much. "It awakened something I have not felt before, something I cannot fully describe. It was remarkable." The Elder's expression hardened. "Remarkable. Do you understand the danger in what you say? You claim a human's words moved you. Words of emotion are forbidden. You risk everything." "I understand," Kalira said, her voice quiet but firm. "And yet I cannot ignore what has happened." The Elder studied her for a long moment. Finally he turned away, muttering to himself. "You are treading a dangerous path, Kalira. Be careful. Curiosity about forbidden things leads only to ruin." Kalira watched him leave, a mixture of fear and resolve swirling inside her. She knew her species would not understand, could not understand, why she felt compelled to explore what humans offered. And yet she could not stop herself. The whisper, simple and human, had unlocked a door she did not know existed, and she could not simply walk away. That afternoon, she returned to the central chamber to observe again. Humans moved among the delegates, their gestures easy, their smiles natural, their words soft but meaningful. Kalira found herself drawn to Elias, who stood in discussion with a smaller alien species, offering reassurance and calm direction. She noticed the way other aliens reacted, some with suspicion, some with curiosity, most with polite distance. Humans were not commanding, not threatening, but somehow their presence influenced everything around them. Kalira realized that humans had a subtle power her species had never cultivated. They did not conquer through intimidation or fear. They did not dominate through strategy or force alone. They influenced through empathy, through connection, through the quiet strength of feeling. And for the first time, Kalira understood that this was a power her people had lost. Her reflection was interrupted when a group of alien diplomats approached. They were curious about the humans, whispering among themselves, unsure how to interpret the calm confidence of these small, unarmed beings. Kalira observed silently, noting the mixture of awe and suspicion in their expressions. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable, unable to reconcile human kindness with the competitive, calculating nature of most interstellar species. Elias noticed her again and smiled, a gesture so simple, so human, that Kalira felt her chest tighten. He moved closer and spoke softly, not just to her, but to the space around them, creating a sense of calm. "Are you well?" he asked. Kalira forced herself to nod. "I am trying," she admitted. "Your words yesterday, they have left me unsettled, and yet awake." Elias tilted his head slightly, understanding her meaning without question. "Sometimes that is how change begins," he said gently. The simplicity of his statement struck her. Change. She had been trained to resist it, to maintain control, to follow the rules. Yet she felt the pull of something new, something she could not resist even if she wanted to. She wanted to explore this awakening, to understand it, to see where it could lead. Over the next few days, Kalira observed humans more closely. She noted the way they interacted with alien delegates, how they listened, how they acknowledged fears without judgment, how they offered encouragement without expecting reward. Each observation deepened her awareness of the subtle, almost invisible threads of influence humans carried with them. It was not a power that could be measured in weapons or technology, yet it was undeniable. Her reflections were interrupted by a sudden crisis. One of the smaller alien species had accidentally damaged a station console, and panic spread among their delegates. Humans moved immediately to help, offering calm words, steady hands, and reassurance. Kalira watched as the tension dissolved, replaced by cooperation and understanding. A single human's presence had shifted the mood of dozens of aliens in moments, and she realized that this was the core of human strength, the ability to act with empathy, to influence without coercion. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, Kalira considered the implications. If humans possessed such subtle, profound power, what could they achieve across the galaxy? Could they shift alliances without battles, resolve conflicts without war, awaken something in species long dead to emotion? And what did this mean for her own people, who had deliberately abandoned such capacities in pursuit of logic and control? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She opened it to find Elias standing there, calm, patient, waiting. "May I enter?" he asked. Kalira stepped aside. "Yes," she said. He entered, carrying nothing but his presence. Kalira felt the familiar tension in her chest, the strange combination of fear and curiosity that had begun the day he whispered those words. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood there observing, patient. Finally, Kalira spoke. "You have changed something in me," she admitted. "Something I cannot yet name. I do not know if it is good or dangerous, but I cannot ignore it." Elias nodded. "Change is often frightening," he said softly. "But it can also be necessary." Kalira considered his words. For the first time in her life, she felt the thrill of possibility. She did not know where this path would lead or what dangers awaited, but she knew she could not turn back. Humanity had shown her a way to feel, to connect, to influence without force, and she wanted to follow that path, no matter how uncertain it might be. That night, Kalira lay on her bed again, but this time, sleep did not evade her entirely. Her mind was alive, buzzing with possibilities, questions, and the faint glow of hope. She had glimpsed a strength greater than any she had known, a force that existed in quiet words, gentle gestures, and the courage to feel. And as she drifted into a tentative rest, she realized that her life, and perhaps the galaxy itself, would never be the same again. Kalira moved through the corridors of the station with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The events of the previous days had unsettled her deeply, yet they had also awakened something in her, a spark of curiosity, a desire to understand what humans could bring to the galaxy. She knew her people would see this as dangerous. Her species had survived for millennia by maintaining control over every thought, every reaction, but she could not ignore the pull she felt toward humanity's quiet strength. As she entered the central chamber, the room seemed busier than ever. Delegates from dozens of species moved about, exchanging information, negotiating deals, and watching the humans with a mixture of fascination and suspicion. Elias stood at the center, speaking softly to a group of smaller aliens. His calm presence seemed to ease tension, and Kalira observed quietly, noting how humans influenced the room without raising their voices or displaying force. Her attention, however, was drawn to her own people. Several of her elders and senior diplomats had gathered nearby, their expressions sharp, their posture rigid. Kalira knew they had been discussing her, speculating about her fascination with the humans. To admit it openly would be dangerous. To remain silent would feel like denying herself the truth she could no longer ignore. She approached the elders with steady steps, her mind focused. "I wish to speak," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. Heads turned. Whispers began. The room seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in her life, Kalira was not following orders, not hiding behind discipline. She was speaking from a place that felt raw and true, though she did not fully understand it herself. An elder stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Kalira, this is highly irregular. What is the meaning of this declaration?" She took a breath, feeling the weight of centuries of tradition pressing against her. "I have observed humans," she said. "I have seen their actions, heard their words, and witnessed the effects they have on those around them. I cannot ignore it. They possess a strength we have forgotten. A power that is not measured in fleets, not in weapons, not in control, but in feeling, in connection, in honesty. And I believe we must consider it." The chamber erupted into murmurs. Some delegates stared in shock. Others whispered among themselves, confused and curious. The elders exchanged sharp glances, their faces betraying a mix of fear and anger. One elder stepped forward, his tone sharp and cold. "Kalira, do you understand the implications of your statement? To suggest that humans possess power, that we should study or consider their methods, is dangerous. It threatens the very foundation of our civilization." Kalira met his gaze steadily. "I understand the risks," she replied, "but I also see the truth. I have felt it. Their strength is real. It is subtle, quiet, and impossible to ignore. To deny it would be to deny what is before our eyes." Another elder spoke, his voice trembling with anger. "You speak of feelings, words of admiration. This is forbidden. You risk everything." Kalira felt a surge of determination. "And yet," she said, her voice rising slightly but still measured, "I cannot deny what I have experienced. Their presence, their honesty, their compassion, it changes the room, the people, even me. It is not weakness, it is power." Silence fell. The weight of her words pressed on the chamber. Even the humans seemed to sense the shift. Elias looked toward her, his expression calm but alert. He did not speak, but his presence offered support in a way that made Kalira feel less alone. Some delegates, especially from other species that valued diplomacy and subtle influence, leaned forward with curiosity. They had never seen anyone from Kalira's species speak like this, not publicly, not in a way that acknowledged anything beyond rigid control and calculation. The idea that emotion could be a strength was foreign to them, yet her conviction demanded attention. One of the smaller alien delegates, a member of a species that had been nearly wiped out in past conflicts, spoke cautiously. I have observed humans as well," he said. "Their actions, they inspire cooperation. Even in tense situations, they bring calm. Perhaps there is truth in what Kalira says." The elders shifted uneasily, realizing that her words had resonance beyond her own species. Kalira felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had broken the rules, risked her standing, and yet she had sparked a conversation that might change the galaxy. Elias finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Kalira is correct," he said. "Humans do not conquer through force alone. We influence, we connect, we reach out. It is not weakness, it is a different kind of strength, one that can complement, not replace, what you already possess." The room fell silent again. Some delegates looked skeptical, others thoughtful. Kalira's own people glared at her, but she did not flinch. She felt a sense of clarity she had never known. For the first time, she understood that strength could take many forms, and that her species' obsession with control had blinded them to an essential truth. Emotion could be a tool, a weapon, and a gift all at once. In the following hours, debates erupted across the station. Delegates argued, questioned, and speculated. Some dismissed Kalira's observations as a fleeting fascination, a distraction. Others began to wonder if humanity's way of being could offer solutions to conflicts that had lasted centuries. Kalira watched and listened, noting how reactions differed across species, how the subtle power of humans' influence rippled outward. Later, Kalira found herself walking beside Elias in a quieter corridor. "Do you understand what you have done?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her calmly. "I only spoke the truth," he said. "It is your courage that amplified it. You have done more than I could. You have opened eyes that have long been closed." Kalira shook her head. "I fear the consequences. My people, they will not forgive this. They may try to punish me, to silence me, or worse." Elias nodded. "Change is never without risk." But the world, your galaxy, needs those who can see possibilities beyond fear. You are doing what few could. Her thoughts returned to the chamber, to the tension and surprise on the faces of her elders, to the murmurs of curiosity from other species. She realized that the human whisper had not just affected her, it had created a ripple. A single word, a single act of recognition, had set in motion events that could alter the balance of the galaxy. Over the next few days, Kalira found herself drawn more and more into human ways. She observed their interactions, their patience, their willingness to acknowledge fear, hope, and doubt without judgment. She noted how they spoke plainly, without manipulation, without hiding behind complex strategies or displays of power. Their influence was subtle but undeniable. Her people watched her closely. Some grew suspicious, whispering among themselves about her fascination with humans. Others began to consider the implications. If one of their own could be moved so profoundly, what might happen if others were exposed to the same influence? Kalira herself felt the tension building within her. She had crossed lines her species had enforced for generations. She had embraced curiosity and vulnerability in a way that would have been unthinkable before. And yet, she felt a growing sense of purpose, a recognition that her actions might lead to something greater than herself. One evening, as the station lights dimmed and the delegates retreated to their quarters, Kalira and Elias met in a quiet observation deck. They watched the stars stretch across the void, the distant ships glimmering like tiny lanterns against the darkness. "Do you think they will ever understand?" Kalira asked, her voice low. Elias smiled gently. "Some will resist, but the seed has been planted. Change rarely happens all at once, and it rarely happens without struggle. You have started something important, Kalira. Trust that it will grow in its own time." Kalira nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. She had opened a door she could never close. She had spoken truths her people might reject, yet she felt compelled to continue. Humanity had shown her that strength was not always measured in power or control. It could be quiet, subtle, and profound. And she was beginning to understand that such strength might be exactly what the galaxy needed. As she returned to her quarters that night, Kalira reflected on the transformation taking place within her. She had been trained to follow rules, suppress curiosity, and avoid emotional entanglements. Yet she had chosen to act differently. She had spoken, observed, and engaged with a humanity that defied expectations. And with each day, she felt herself becoming something new, not just a member of her species, but a bridge between worlds, a witness to a power that had long been ignored. For the first time in her life, Kalira felt alive in a way that went beyond discipline, beyond duty, beyond obedience. She felt capable of understanding, of influencing, of creating change. And she knew that the human whisper, small and simple though it had been, had unlocked not just her own potential, but the possibility for a new kind of strength to emerge across the stars. Kalira could feel the change in the station almost immediately. News of her public declaration and her observations about humans had spread rapidly. Some delegates whispered with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with open hostility. Her species, long devoted to control and discipline, was struggling to process what she had done. Yet Kalira felt a strange calm within herself. She had made a choice, and she could no longer step back. The station itself seemed to reflect the tension. Humans moved through corridors with quiet confidence, interacting with alien delegates with patience and empathy. Even the smallest gestures, a helping hand, a kind word, a shared smile, rippled outward, affecting not only those they touched directly but others who observed. Kalira watched closely, noting how subtle the influence was and how impossible it was to resist. Her own species watched her closely. Meetings of the elders were heated, filled with debate and concern. Some demanded that Kalira be reprimanded, fearing that her fascination with humanity might inspire others to question the centuries of strict control. Others hesitated, unsure how to respond. Kalira's courage had sparked something deeper than curiosity. It had opened the possibility that her people might not need to live under the rigid rules they had followed for so long. Kalira herself had changed. She was no longer the quiet observer who followed every protocol. She now approached her duties with awareness, intentionally seeking opportunities to learn from humans, to witness their methods, to understand their strength. She spoke openly with Elias, asking questions about human values, about their history, about the way they had survived despite being physically weaker than many species in the galaxy. Each answer expanded her understanding and deepened her respect. One afternoon, Kalira found herself in a council meeting with representatives from multiple species. The topic was conflict resolution on a contested planet far from the station. Delegates argued over strategies, over threats, over tactics designed to intimidate or overpower opponents. Kalira listened, feeling the familiar tension build, and then she spoke. "Perhaps there is another way," she said, her voice steady. The chamber fell silent. Eyes turned toward her, some skeptical, some curious. "We have been trained to rely on control, on fear, on power. But I have observed humans. I have seen how they can influence without force, how they connect, how they resolve conflicts through understanding and empathy. Perhaps we can consider their methods." Murmurs spread through the chamber. One of the elder diplomats from her species spoke sharply. "Kalira, do you suggest we abandon the principles that have guided us for millennia? Do you suggest we trust a species whose ways we barely understand?" "I suggest only that we consider possibilities," Kalira replied calmly. "Change does not mean abandoning principles. It means learning, adapting, and understanding. Humans have shown us that strength can take many forms. Perhaps we should listen." There was silence. Even those who doubted her could not ignore the sincerity and conviction in her voice. Elias, standing nearby, nodded slightly, offering support without intrusion. Kalira felt a surge of confidence. She had taken the first step toward bridging the gap between her people and humanity. The discussion continued, and slowly, others began to contribute. Delegates from species that valued diplomacy and subtle influence spoke cautiously, noting the effectiveness of humans in resolving conflicts. The chamber gradually shifted from debate to curiosity. Kalira realized that her courage, combined with human example, was creating a ripple effect that might change the way the galaxy approached interaction and negotiation. Later, Kalira returned to her quarters, exhausted but energized. She reflected on the day's events and realized how far she had come. She had spoken openly, challenged centuries of tradition, and seen the beginning of a transformation. Yet she also knew the risks. Not all her species would accept change willingly. Some would resist, some might even try to punish her. But for the first time, she felt a sense of clarity. The potential of humanity's influence was worth any risk. That evening, she found herself walking along the observation deck with Elias. The stars stretched endlessly before them, and the silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than expectation. "You have inspired more than you realize," Elias said softly. "Your courage has opened eyes, not just among your people but across the station. Some are beginning to see that there is another way." Kalira nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest she had never experienced before. "I still fear the consequences," she admitted. "But I cannot ignore what I have witnessed. Humans, they show us something we have forgotten, something we need to remember." "They do," Elias replied, "and you are helping them share it. You are the bridge, Kalira. You are the one who connects their strength to the understanding your people have long neglected." Kalira felt a surge of determination. She realized that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, filled with species that had long relied on force, fear, and control. Humans, with their empathy and honesty, had the potential to change much more than the station. They could change the way civilizations thought, acted, and interacted. Over the next few weeks, Kalira continued her work. She facilitated meetings, observed human interactions, and recorded every detail of their methods. She noticed patterns, how humans used patience to diffuse tension, how they acknowledged mistakes to build trust, how they recognized the worth of others without demanding anything in return. Each observation reinforced what she already knew. Their strength was subtle, quiet, and profoundly effective. Her species continued to react with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Some delegates followed her example, cautiously observing humans and noting the effects of their actions. Others grew frustrated, convinced that her fascination was dangerous and reckless. Kalira accepted their doubts, knowing that transformation always faced resistance. She had seen it in her own life, and she knew that change was never immediate. It was gradual, persistent, and powerful in its own way. One day, a crisis erupted on a neighboring planet. Two species had been in conflict for decades, unable to reach an agreement despite repeated interventions by more powerful civilizations. Kalira and Elias were called to mediate. The elders of her species watched closely, their skepticism apparent, yet Kalira felt no fear. She had learned from the humans, and she understood that true strength came from empathy, patience, and clarity. When they arrived, tensions were high. Weapons were displayed, accusations were thrown, and anger threatened to erupt into violence. Kalira stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We are here to listen," she said. "We are here to understand. We are not here to judge or command. Let us speak openly, honestly, and without fear." Elias followed, offering gentle guidance, modeling the patience and honesty that humans naturally embodied. Slowly, the leaders of the warring species began to respond. At first, with suspicion, then cautiously with willingness to listen. Kalira watched as the room transformed. The anger that had seemed unmanageable began to dissolve. Words replaced threats, understanding replaced suspicion. And in that moment, Kalira realized the truth of what she had been observing all along. Humans, quiet strength could create change where force alone had failed. By the end of the day, the conflict was not fully resolved, but progress had been made. Delegates left with new perspectives, new willingness to negotiate, and a recognition that cooperation was possible even among ancient rivals. Kalira felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. She had witnessed the practical power of empathy, honesty, and courage, and she had helped guide it into action. Returning to the station, Kalira reflected on the journey so far. She had begun as an observer, cautious and disciplined, bound by rules and tradition. Yet she had grown into something more, a bridge between species, a witness to the subtle power of humanity, and an agent of change in a galaxy resistant to it. Elias approached her quietly as she looked out over the stars. "You have done something remarkable," he said softly. "Not just for your people, but for the galaxy. You have opened doors that were long closed." Kalira smiled, feeling a deep sense of purpose. "I have only followed what I could see," she replied. "The humans, they have shown me what is possible. I am only trying to help others see it too." The night passed with quiet reflection. Kalira realized that her own species was beginning to change, even if slowly. Some delegates had begun to adopt human methods, cautiously experimenting with empathy and openness. Others resisted, but she understood that change was never instantaneous. It was the accumulation of small actions, patient observation, and the courage to embrace the unknown. As she prepared for sleep, Kalira felt a deep sense of hope. The galaxy was vast, filled with conflict and challenge, but also with possibility. Humans, with their quiet strength, had reminded her that power did not always reside in dominance or fear. It could reside in honesty, connection, and courage. And she, Kalira, had become part of that movement, carrying the spark of change forward into worlds that had long forgotten the value of empathy. For the first time, she felt truly alive. The human whisper that had frozen her in place so many days ago had not only awakened her, it had set in motion a force that could reshape civilizations. Kalira understood now that strength was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, and profound. And sometimes it could change everything. The human whisper stopped time. The alien woman stood frozen in silence.